The biggest cost on your development probably isn't even in your spreadsheet yet. If you haven't checked utilities properly before you buy, you're taking a huge gamble. Infrastructure charges, second comer fees, gas subsidy removals, traffic management costs. These are not small numbers, and they're catching developers out every single week. Welcome to the Proper Property Podcast. I'm Luke, and today I'm joined by Dean Pattison, the Managing Director of Utility Source, a utility consultant who works with investors and developers before purchase and right through to completion. Today we are breaking down a few things: the hidden utility costs when developers don't see, why comparing your next site to your last one is dangerous, when utilities should be accessed, and why the system isn't built to be consumer or customer friendly. If you're doing development, a new build, or commercial conversions, this episode could protect your margin. Dean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great to have you. Before we do get into the technical stuff, obviously we had a quick chat and a quick catch up before the podcast. And you mentioned something which I want to jump straight into because I've been dying to find out a little bit more about it. So you were singing in working men's clubs, is that right?
I was.
Tell me more about that.
Well, just to be clear, I weren't a male stripper, as you first thought.
I'm almost disappointed.
That does worry me. Kind of very shy growing up. But as I was growing up, my dad was a singer in working men's club, and musician. And I just one day found myself singing on karaoke, and then all of a sudden I was on stage in a band or two, and then as a solo singer. I wasn't particularly great at it, but I made a living, and it was a nice lifestyle for a young man at the time. And then obviously you have to get a proper job, and for me that lifestyle just didn't work for me as a sort of long-term thing. But yeah, some great experiences.
But it was
great experiences.
And was that local to the area or?
All over the place, mainly sort of Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster, Barnsley, but every now and again they send you a little bit further, and some good experiences like St Butlins and Avon Holidays and things like that.
Yep.
So I've seen some sites.
Brilliant.
I've had a good time. Yeah,
Great. Well, I had to bring it up as soon as I seen it there in the notes. I had to bring it up. So let's go back a little bit before you were a utilities consultant, because obviously this has not been your lane the entire time. So what were you before you got into utilities?
So again, growing up, not particularly well guided in terms of pursuing a career or anything like that. I went to college because my mum and dad said I had to. Not because I planned anything. It weren't at the time.
That's just what everyone does, right?
At school at the time, nothing was particularly career driven. It was just do something. So I went to college. I did a BTEC National Diploma in Public Services. So I got some experience at sociology, criminology, law, as well as sort of the physical element of it, health and fitness, stamina, all that kind of stuff. Really enjoyable, to be fair. But I came out of that without a clue what I wanted to do. I went and worked in a couple of bars. I worked in a curtain factory. Did a little bit of work in a carpet factory. Not really progressing with anything. It was just a bit of cash to go out with.
Yep.
And then I
kind of working for the weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And then I fell into the singing stuff. And as I said, it was a great experience. But you get to a point where you're studying club on Thursday afternoon, putting a couple of quid in Bandit and having a pint, and your mates are at work.
Yeah.
And then they're asking you if you're going out on a Friday and a Saturday, but you're working. So it kind of came to a bit of a crossroads for me in all seriousness, where I had to do something. And a friend of mine, Brian Alsop he's called, went to school with him, and he was working for a company called Fulcrum Connections, which were a subsidiary of National Grid. And he just said to me, in passing, they're taking on at our place. And I just went there as an agency member of staff. I was late on my first day because I'd been out the night before.
Classic.
They were ringing me up. So it's not something that I took particularly seriously. I wouldn't advise that to anybody now. And I started there on £5 an hour. And I went in and I remember sitting next to Brian, phone rang and he said, "Oh, you're going to answer it?" I'm like, "No chance, I'm not answering it." Why would I answer it? I don't know what I'm talking about. And that's how it all started. So prior to that, it was just really living life and making it through week, making sure I could go out on a weekend. And then obviously as you grow up a little bit and you sort of meet someone, you settle down and all that, everything that comes with that. So
not everybody does grow up. There's still a lot of people that are my age, your age, older than us, that are still living for the weekend, working for the weekend.
I'm sure one or two of my friend group will watch this and they're a prime example. No, people do. I think sometimes people just find the way in life naturally. Sometimes people never really find the way in life, but they really enjoy themselves a long way. And I'm probably a little bit in between. And I started there. I was there for 15 years.
Wow.
And
so it really was the door into this industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely no interest in it whatsoever. No understanding of it. I fell into something and I tried hard, and that got recognised. And they had a grading system. And you started as an agency member of staff. Then it was grade 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, senior manager. And I worked my way through each one of those grades.
Fantastic.
So when I left that business and went to a consultancy business, I was a senior manager. I would like to think I was quite highly thought of in that business, but I didn't know it at the time. But what an education. I think I got so much out of that in terms of not just learning about utilities and the industry, but learning about people, how to manage people and emotion. And I kind of had this thing where I was pretty good with customers. So you'd have a customer screaming at you and you just said, one liner, and all of a sudden you're back on a level and they see you as someone who can help instead of
there's an art to that. There's an art to that. I'm from a hotel background,
right?
And I loved conflict resolution. Obviously, in a hotel, there's always complainants. Doesn't matter how perfect it is, something is being complained about.
Yeah,
and I loved it. If I overheard that there was a complaint, I'm like, I'll deal with that, because I was good like that with the one-liners. Bringing yourself down to their level. I used a thing called the HEART module, which was hear, empathise, apologise, react, and thank. And I went through those 5 things in my head. And every single time I went, I made sure that they knew that I heard what they were saying. I empathised with them. I apologised, reacted, as in like did something about it, and then thanked them. And it fixed every problem. And I still use that module today in business, in my businesses that I've got. And I mention it to people as well, because there is an art to it. And unless you do start empathizing and bringing yourself down to their situation, you can't resolve any conflict.
No, I agree with you. I probably did it in a way that weren't quite as structured as that. But that, again, is...
Did you sing to him?
Very badly. No, probably best. Might have been situation worse. But no, probably not as structured as that. But again, it's like, for me, it's always been a case of put yourself in their shoes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And when I moved on, I went to a consultancy business with people who were friends at the time. It didn't end well. I think if something ends, you shake hands and walk away. It didn't quite work like that. And I were in a position, bit of a sliding doors moment, where I had to decide what I'm going to do next. And it was my wife who said to me, "Well, what do you want to do?" And, "Well, don't worry, I'll go and get a job." And it was like, "No, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you what you want to do." And I just said, I'd like to have a go at it myself, because I understand what we deliver in, but I think if you're a much smaller business and you can give an individual, a person, a customer, a developer, whoever it might be, if you can give them time and you can give them quality within that time, you get a better result.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah, and I think I was in a fortunate position that I got this pretty good reputation in industry, and I'd got historical customers who were contacting me saying, "What you're doing, where you're at." And I had opportunity to jump straight in. And I had a couple of jobs to go at. And it's, we're 8 years in. My company, Utility Source, we're 8 years in. And it's been quite a challenging journey, because we started up a couple of years before COVID. Then you've got the unsettled period of COVID, and you're kind of trying to build a business upwards. We've got a great customer base now. But within that period of time, my view on the customer base changed. So I was pursuing developers because that's all I knew from previous business. And I discovered property investors, and it's a completely different principle. So I tend to find that a developer is such a small part of the piece that it's about getting the job done and not about education.
Yep.
So we can work with a developer and they'll make all the same mistakes every time because it's about getting the job done. Whereas with a property investor, it's about becoming part of a small team and getting it right. But the property investor generally wants to feed off of you and learn at the same time.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a passion for learning and development. And part of my education at Fulcrum, I was heading up learning and development. So we're a massive company with lots of different types of learning and development needs. So you've got the technical element of it, people stood on site connecting gas supplies.
Yep.
And you've got the sort of people skill element of it, the management development and things like that. So something that I always had a real interest in. And that kind of developed into the campaign that we did last year. So we did a little campaign called Utilitopoly, and it really were focused on property investors.
Utilitopoly?
Yeah.
Is that like a play on Monopoly?
Yeah, so if anyone from Hasbro's watching, somebody else invented it. If they're not, basically just took a Monopoly board and where you have all the properties, replaced them with different types of utility job.
Yep.
So obviously there are hundreds of different types of job. And then from there, the chance and community chess cards changed them into take a chance. And when you pick one of them up, it's kind of like, have you thought about this? Have you done that? Because if you haven't, there is a natural implication. And the implication is either going to be time or money.
Or both.
Yeah, the community chess ones as well, we kind of changed to kind of like in the community type of thing. So really silly things that you won't think of. So for example, if you've bought a development aside of a school and we're going to put utilities in, there's a pretty good chance council are going to say, you've got to work in holidays. Now, if it's January and your completion date's in April and we can't get in until July, then you've got a problem. You've got a problem with your programme, you've got a problem with your lending. And it were really focused on allowing people to understand that it's not just about getting a quote to take utilities from A to B. There are all these other considerations. And that programme really were based on education. It were based on giving as much information as possible. So in our industry, it's a bit of a dark art. So you get a quote and they'll send you a bit of information through. Then you have to read it, you have to work it out, and then you have to have a best guess at site. Am I right? Have I done it right?
Yeah.
The reality is, it's like magic circle. So we all know, but we're not going to lead you through it.
Yeah.
We'll tell you, but we'll not lead you through it. And my role in this is kind of like that. There were a program on TV years ago where there was this mass magician, and he'd do a trick and then he'd break it down and show you how he did it, which probably didn't go down well with all the people in magic circle. Like. So for me, it's like I'm not a magician by any stretch of imagination, but it's kind of opening up all of these things that you have to do in preparation, all of the rules, all of the policies, procedures, to open them up and say, are you aware of this? Are you aware you need to do this, to do that, to do other, the cost of this, the cost of that, the time implications? Because if we educate people to understand all that, and they're looking at that right from the very start of a development, or even before they bought it, then they'll have a better journey, and I'll have a better journey.
Yeah,
it makes
rather than an afterthought.
Yeah,
because I feel, I mean, we've looked at properties before, and we've looked at title splits where we turn in a property from one large property into smaller properties, and I'll be honest, I knew that there was going to be utilities that needed to be changed and redirected to do that. But it wasn't the first thing on my list. It wasn't the first thing I calculated, but probably should be, right?
I would say yes. We are a very small part of that development journey. It doesn't matter what the development is, whether it's an HMO, whether it's a commercial to resi conversion, whether it's a new build site, don't matter what development it is, even sort of your commercial developments. We're a very small part of piece, but in terms of the implications of not getting it right, we are the biggest impact.
Yeah.
because if they turn up and you're not ready, it's another 8 weeks. Yeah. If there's a road closure, it's 12 weeks. They're all things that I could sit here all day and kind of throw scenarios.
And there's a cost to that as well. I know at first hand a road closure is expensive.
Yeah, and this is where it's really difficult for people to kind of follow rules, because if you're in Sheffield and you're working with Northern Power Grid, Yorkshire Water, Sheffield Council, this is how we do it. If you're in Leeds, we do it slightly differently.
Yeah.
If you then venture outside of the Yorkshire boundaries and you go into, I don't know, a little bit further out, say Manchester side,
yep,
then you're working within United Utilities, and they have a completely different outlook to Yorkshire Water.
So it's not one size fits all.
No, and then you move out of Yorkshire Water or United Utilities area into Severn Trent's area, and again it's a different set of rules, a different set of principles,
yep,
a different set of processes. So you might do a commercial to resi conversion in Rotherham, and everything might go great. You might have really sort of bottomed down what your costs were on it. But then you move into Severn Trent's area and you do the same thing. It might cost more, it might cost less, it might be delivered in a different way. You're working with a different council or working a different way with a different charging structure. There are so many different variations of doing what we do that you can't measure one job against another.
Yeah.
Every job's got to be taken on its own merit. So in our business, what I encourage our customers to do is to contact us before they buy a piece of land or before they buy a building. Now, I can't give all the answers because some of the answers are hidden, which is some of the discussion we'll come on to. But I, at that point, can look at the equipment that they've got.
Yep.
I can tell them what they've got, whether it's suitable to be reused. If it isn't, why it isn't suitable to be reused. Where the local infrastructure is, so we can pull plans down from the network operators so that we can see get a rough idea of where the local network infrastructure is, if there are connections to be done. So from that, I'd be able to say to you, well, do you know what, to get from A to B, we've got to cross this dual carriageway, it's going to cost you a fortune.
Yeah.
Right. These are all the implications of it. You might be 6 months getting your job done. And at that point, you can say, right, do you know what, I've done numbers on this, but now you've given me this Riemann information, it don't wash its face. So I'm going to walk away from this one.
Do you see a lot of people coming to you after they've purchased it?
At 90% after. And it is getting better, I think, but it only gets better when you've made the mistake.
Yeah.
So when you learn the hard way and you cost your time and it costs you money, that's when people come and say, right, I've got to be a little bit more measured here on this topic. Here's my site plan, here's the building, we can get access on such and such date, can you come and meet us? And sometimes we'll go into very, very sort of open with people. Sometimes we'll go into a property and say, right, everything's fine, you can use this equipment for the purpose that you need it. But in most cases, particularly when the existing buildings, you've got to change what's there. You can't rely on the equipment in there being suitable for your development, particularly if you want to meter everything independently. Yeah. So I come across a lot of commercial to resi conversions, and there's a three-phase supply. It might be a pub, so there's a three-phase supply. Well, by definition of the three phases, you can only have three meters on it. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing 10 flats, you can't use it. It needs to be replaced. Yeah, it's replaced by a BEMCO unit, which allows you to have a meter for each property. But if you haven't done it before, or you haven't done that type of development before, you just don't know.
Yeah.
So it's worth having.
We say this all the time. Johnny loves this phrase. You only know when you know, and until you know, you don't know, right? And I think it's great that you, as a consultation role, trying to reach out to investors rather than just developers, where ultimately it's more cost damaging to an investor than maybe a developer, because if you're at the stage where you're developing large projects, you've got more of a contingency buffer to fall back on, whereas an investor that's maybe working at a project by project basis, if you make that mistake, you don't have that buffer to fall back on. It could destroy that deal and destroy that business essentially. So it's really important that, as you've just touched on there, to get that knowledge before you make the purchase.
Yeah. Absolutely essential, in my opinion. But even in that circumstance, there are still things that I can't tell you.
Yeah.
So as an example, I've got a job in Pontefract. It's a lovely job. It's an old bank. And I have had that experience where I've met the property investor. We've talked about what they're going to do with that property, how it should be configured, looked at where we could create a plant room so that all of the utilities can be put in the right place. We've looked at what the feasibility is, what the possibilities are, and given some high-level budget figures, which are never worth paper that they're written on, but it's kind of a starter for
It's a guide, isn't it? Yeah.
And then you put the applications in to the network operators or the contractors, and it's a difficult one because at that point it's going to cost best part of £1,500 just to get the quotes. So in recent years, Yorkshire Water in this area, their price for an application fee has gone up to £547.
From what?
It started off at around 149, I think. And then a few years ago, the electric industry implemented something called connections expenses. So it's kind of opening it up for electric companies to charge for a quote. There are some that don't charge, but Northern Power Grid do. It started off at £330, I think it were. Then it went to £660, then £990, and now it's about £1,200 for certain types of jobs.
And what's the justification for these jumps?
So there is no justification for them. It's just they don't give us any. It just moves. It moves with time. It moves with sort of economic progress and stuff. But it's a lot of money at that stage to get something firmed up.
And these all seem, correct me if I'm wrong, but these all seem fairly like hidden charges, hidden costs.
They're hidden till you apply. So you apply and then you get, I mean, the Yorkshire Water one is standard. You have to pay that to progress your application. But the connections expenses, you get that after you've applied. So they'll write back to you and said, your job falls into this category, therefore we charge X amount. And dependent on what the type of work is, dependence on how expensive that gets. But the outcome of that is that they put some time into it. They'll do some network calculations. They'll have a look at whether you can connect there, whether you can't connect there. So just referring back to that particular project, we wouldn't have known at the time that the council were going to say, well, you can only work on a weekend and you can only work between certain hours and you've got to close this road off. Therefore, the costs start to move upwards. And in addition to that, from an electric perspective, there's a main outside, which you on face value, you look at and you think, yeah, we can potentially connect to that. Yep. Well, we don't know what is also connected to that. So in that particular instance, the answer were, well, actually, there's no capacity left on that cable. So we're going to have to go 30 metres up road. Well, 30 metres might not sound a lot, but that's 30 metres of excavation, 30 metres of reinstatement. So that's where...
You're not just running it along top of the path, are you? It's got to go underground.
And then when we got to that connection point, we're connecting to a main that's just been paid for by another developer.
Yeah.
And that's where second comer charges are applied. Now, second comer charge is where it's electrical legislation that if you pay 30 grand for a main to be installed, and I watch you install it, and then I think, right, I'll connect to that, right? They apply a calculation to my quote to say, well, you know, it's a couple of grand to connect to this cable, but they might charge me another 10 because they're going to give you 10 back, because it's only fair that if you've paid for that, I don't piggyback off the back of it.
Oh, yeah.
So, but there's no indicator to say, well, this developer's paid for that and it's within that 10-year period that you can apply the second comer charges. So something that should have perhaps been £15,000, £18,000 has come in at the best part of 40.
Yeah.
And even I can't see that. So it is understanding how things work, the basic principles, but then also understanding that when you're putting your figures in, they've got to be provisional figures.
Yeah.
Because if you're firming things up with your lender and there's no wriggle room, then that money's got to come from somewhere, and normally it's out your pocket. So it is a very challenging environment at the moment, and those costs are just getting higher.
Yeah, brilliant. It's good to know. So Quick question. If I'm buying a site tomorrow, let's say it's an old farmhouse, it's not been used for maybe 10 years. I don't even know how it was previously used. What am I looking for? The first thing I need to look for.
I think instantly, what have you got? As daft as it sounds, I would say to you, can you take me a photo of the cutout, so the incoming equipment?
Yep.
Take me a photograph of what's there. Take me a photograph of the meter. And from that, we can just visually see what you've got if we can't get access to the site. We'd rather go and have a look.
Yeah.
You know, photographs are fine. So what have you got? Then what do you need? Right? Is the size of that, the load, the capacity available, is that going to give you what you need to operate that building the way you want to operate it? If the answer is yes, then it's a case of you taking responsibility for the billing, right? Absolutely essential. You would not believe the number of people that I speak to or coming to me with £2,000-3,000 bills because they've not completed a change of tenancy when they took ownership. The difficulty with that is if you don't take a meter reading at start, then where does the meter reading start when you're arguing it out with energy supplier? You've got to take a meter reading, you've got to contact energy supplier, you've got to agree a contract, and then you're responsible for your own bills.
Yeah.
We get so many where the energy supplier has got a, I don't know, £5,000 debt. Oh, they've taken this on, let's give them the £5,000 debt. And it's very difficult to argue out. But that
because no meter reading has been made, so there's essentially no real evidence to say that you haven't used that energy.
Yeah, well, and then it's me saying, right, I need your land registry documents to prove what date you bought this property, and we've got to do some estimation on if you'd have lived in there for 12 months, what would an average household use? And then it's working all that back and just wasting time really on
for the case of doing
you could have resolved
meter
it.
reading.
You could have resolved it by contacting them with a meter reading. that is the next bit. If the answer is no, it's not suitable for what we need, and we work out exactly what your requirements are, it's then putting applications in, explaining to network operators what you want. It's a funny industry. There are different ways of doing things. So if you were Taylor Wimpey, for example, and you were building 500 houses, completely different. You wouldn't use the network operators. You'd go down the route of using independent contractors because the infrastructure can be adopted by an independent distribution network operator. So it's more cost effective, the bigger the job gets, to go down the competition in connections route.
Yeah.
Whereas for something that you're talking about, we would apply to the network operator. We as a company would do that on your behalf if you wanted us to. We have a standard uplift that we put on every job, quite open with that as well. And you would get a quote from me, not Northern Power Grid, with our uplift on. And the difference between getting a quote from Northern Power Grid and me is that instead of getting 36 pages, you get 5 pages and it actually tells you what to do.
Well, that actually goes on to my next question is, I've always found utilities, when the bill comes through, when you're talking about utilities, it's always too complicated. And you've just said that, as I was thinking that, you just said instead of getting the 30-page from Northern Power Grid, you get a 5-page. I'm assuming your 5-page is like a layman's terms of this is how it is in simple terms. Why can't all utility providers and services be like that?
Because everything that they do is about discharging risk, right? So, and I have issues with this, that I'm sort of going through a process at the moment where I'm starting to push envelope and challenge back. So if I use Northern Power Grid's quote as an example, it is full of information. A lot of it is just contractual jargon and terminology
that nobody understands
and nobody reads, right? But for you as a investor or a developer, there's a page that says we're going to charge you 40 grand and we're going to do A, B, and C to install your utilities.
Yep.
You have an obligation to dig a trench on your land, to put a duct in of this specification, to put branded marker tape in on top of the duct, to put cable hockey sticks up the wall, put meter boxes in. And for the ease of pulling the cable in, we want you to put a draw rope through. That's it. At this moment in time, they're applying so many different preferences. So I've got a few sites at the moment, one in particular where we're not pulling your cable in because your curb edges aren't in. Well, if you're on a small site and you put curb edges in at an early stage, what's going to happen to them?
They're all breaking.
They're all breaking. You've got wagons coming in and out, deliveries coming in and out. So it's a complete waste of time. I've had one recently where I've been told he's got to build the road up before they pull the ducting in, which, again, back to Taylor Wimpey, if they're doing 500 houses, it's probably a planning condition that they've got to put the drainage and the road in first.
Yeah.
But a small developer who's got a little bit of space on his site puts it in last. You can't treat them in the same way. So I have an issue with the preferences because the contract doesn't say that I've got to do that.
Right.
So we're applying preferences in Rotherham, yet in Wakefield, Bradford, Leeds, it's a different principle. So I'm taking issue at the moment with things like that, and I am making a little bit of noise about it because I don't think that you as a developer should have to put your curb edgings in for them to get broken because that's your cost and not theirs.
Yeah.
It doesn't say it in the contract. Contractual law is applied to that contract.
And you can bet every last penny in your pocket that if it was their cost, they wouldn't be putting no curb edges in.
Well, the interesting thing about that is in the same area, I have a job where they've got a substation on our site. And when we excavated on site, their cables were shallow. So I did the right thing. I told them your cables are shallow. And they,
as a layman, is that bad?
Yeah, so basically, sorry, yeah. So your cables have got to be laid at a certain depth. Yeah. So if you're on a road, for example, you have a depth of cover of 600 mil, and that is for safety purposes. It's to make sure that you've got a cable in a duct and it's not going to get damaged. There's not going to, be any accidents or anything. So on this particular site, it was shallow. So as I said, reported it. They came along. They did a piece of work where they theoretically dropped the cables. But they didn't ask for any curb edges to go in, and they didn't ask the developer for any line or level. So right now, they don't know whether those cables are at the right depth or not. Yeah. So again, for me, if you're applying a preference, and it can't be a policy because it's not written into the contract, if you're applying a preference, then it's got to be consistent with what you're doing yourselves. And there are times where things conflict. And I see it. When we did the utilitopoly thing, it was about giving people information, and it were really effective, really enjoyable. And then I've got to the point where I think, well, do you know what? It's fine giving that information out, but how are they performing? The network operators performing against that. So it's okay saying you've got to do A, B, C, D, and E before we'll come and do the work for you.
Yeah.
But how are you performing against that? So I'll give you an example. I was on a site earlier on this week. Yorkshire Water have come and laid a main and some services. They've done all the work. All we've done is the excavations. And an inspector came out after it had been connected up. And he said, I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with other. You're going to have to dig this out and we'll correct it. And I stopped him and said, hang on a minute. You've come to inspect it after your team have connected it up. That makes no sense whatsoever. If you weren't happy with something, you should have come before, or they should have stopped these connections from taking place. They were adamant. So we walked up front at site, and he's referring me to the design, and I'm looking at the design, and I had to agree with him on a couple of things. But then I pointed out that his pipe comes into the site, and it's not at the right depth, it's shallow. And the valves that are installed are at the front at site and not in middle at site where they were supposed to be. All of a sudden, completely different attitude towards things because they've not followed their own policy and procedure as part of that process.
But we're pushing you on.
Pushing me. And my words to him were, you're expecting me to accept that, but you're not prepared to accept the other way around. And ultimately, I just said to him, look, if your team have come along and connected that, they've taken liability for it. So as far as I'm concerned, there's not a discussion. I can have those discussions. There's no emotion. I'm not emotive. It's not my money. It's not my site. They're not my completion dates. I've got no liabilities when it comes to penalties on lending or anything like that. My approach is more around making sure there's some consistency and that things are right. You can't force somebody to do something if you're not performing as well.
Do you think the inconsistencies from these companies come from incompetence, or maybe the systems aren't structured or the businesses aren't structured well enough to be more consistent? What do you think?
There are different circumstances. So if I use Northern Power Grid as an example, I love working with Northern Power Grid. I actually think they're a really good company. But all of the old school engineers who've spent 20, 30 years looking at these sites, looking at engineering challenges, they've all moved on. And then inevitably you get a new wave of people coming in who are highly educated, but they've got to learn on job, and they've got to experience all of these different circumstances and understand the reality of a building site and how dynamic a building site can be. And that is something that develops over time. So we're having challenges because we are working out a book. The book says no. In other circumstances, you look at Yorkshire Water, they've had a really problematic 2 years where they managed out a framework contractor and brought a new framework contractor in. And I speak to head of developer services on a regular basis, and he's on this crusade, if you like, to become a customer-orientated business that starts moving up the league tables that Ofwat have got for performance. And as good as he is, and as good as his team around him is, they've got a framework contractor, not direct labour. So that framework contractor interprets the contractual detail in a different way that Yorkshire Water do at times. And I think the biggest issue is the consequences of failure. With Yorkshire Water, there aren't any. So if they don't turn up, then they just plan it in for another few weeks' time. There aren't any consequences of failure, which is why I like Northern Power Grid, because if I'm on site with Northern Power Grid and their job's behind, all of a sudden another team turns up because there's a financial consequence of them failing their standards.
I've always found with Northern Power Grid that when there's been a power cut, they're very quick to respond. Very quick in comparison to your other utility providers, like Yorkshire Water, for example. Very slow. In my opinion, from what I've experienced
consequences of failure. If Northern Power Grid didn't respond quick enough, and same as all the electric companies, they would be fined heavily. Right. And that is because Ofgem is more proactive than Ofwat.
Got you.
Ofwat, I've spoken to Ofwat on several occasions. All they're interested in is the consumer. They're not interested in the developer, which I can't get my head around because the new consumers are going to come from the developers. When you look at Yorkshire Water's strategy, there's reams and reams of paperwork about spending billions of pounds on improving their network, but not a great deal of text in there about how they're going to support and develop developer services, which is the part that do new connections. So it's kind of lopsided, and it needs a lot of work. And as I said, there's a lot of development taking place in Yorkshire Water at the moment, which is going to be really positive for people like us, in that you're going to have so much more visibility and some accountability in there. But at the end of the day, whether it's Yorkshire Water, Cadent Gas, Northern Power Grid, National Grid, Severn Trent Water, they're in the driving seat. And at the moment, in most cases, if you don't do things their way, you don't get your utilities connected. And for me, again, being someone with no emotion towards it, I sit back and look at that and think, well, if you're paying an obscene amount of money for your utilities to be connected, it's got to be customer orientated. And at the moment, it's not. It's engineers turning up at site saying, you will do things this way, otherwise we will not. And that is the answer. And that can't be the case. It's got to change.
So that's what needs to change, isn't it?
Yeah, it does.
And do you think there's a roadmap to change, or?
I think in some businesses, yes. When I look at Northern Power Grid, you can see that is purely education and experience, and that's developing quickly. There's some great engineers at Northern Power Grid, really knowledgeable, really technical, and there are some that will take time to look at your site and think, yeah, I can see that you've got these restrictions. We'll work with you. With Yorkshire Water, that's a completely different piece. That's a complete rebuild, and bringing themselves into 21st century. So I mean, the computer system that they use, you can get a letter from them with 6 different reference numbers on it, and none of them reference numbers match the one that's on your quote. So right at the very start, you can't get it right. And they lack experience in certain areas, technical experience, because the framework contractor came from a drainage background rather than a clean water background. So that's developing over time. and the interaction between them is developing over time. But that one's a little bit more of a complicated adjustment.
Amazing. Listen, all this is really, really, really interesting and informative. But we are rapidly running out of time. So, I mean, for me, this is really opened my eyes. As I said, utilities were always not the last thing on the spreadsheet, but they were certainly not the first thing on the spreadsheet. And I think that's going to have certainly changed my mindset on things. But for anybody that is a developer or an investor that's watching or listening to this podcast, I mean, you can look into that camera there and just tell them what you can do for them, how you can do it, and how they can find you. Because I think there's going to be a lot of people listening and watching this that has taken a lot of value from this podcast, and I think could take a lot of value from you talking to you and meeting with you in the future. So into that camera there, tell them how they can find you and how you can help them.
Yeah, so my company is called Utility Source. We're a utilities consultant. We're only based in Worthing, Rotherham, Barnsley, whichever is not kind of on border. And we are available to speak to property investors and developers at any time. I would prefer to speak to people before they buy a piece of land or before they buy a building, so that I can give you the best opportunity to get it right first time. I'm always contactable. The office is always contactable. So my phone number is 07827 779 630. I'm sure I'll have Yorkshire Water and Northern Power Grid ringing me up shortly. But yeah, we're happy to come and meet you at your site. We're happy to come and look at your plans. Happy to give you some input, and that may at some point at that front end save you some money, save you some time, save you some hassle. We get involved in all types of work, from new build developments, conversion developments, HMOs, disconnections, site clearances, demolition, you name it. We get involved in it, and we can highlight things that you will not think about. As an example, doing a BT registration right at the start of your project instead of thinking about it when you've finished can save you 9 months. And they're a small business, only 5 or 6 of us. Myself and Danny constantly out on sites, constantly going and meeting people, and we would love to just contribute to helping you get things right.
Amazing. Listen, if you do find that helpful, or you have found that helpful, please do reach out. Dean's very approachable, really nice guy, top bloke. He'd be more than happy to help. We've been the Proper Property Podcast. I've been Luke. I've been joined by Dean. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.